Welcome back to this second installment of our Imperialism unit. Today we're focusing on imperialism in the presidency. I'm Mr. Valancourt and I'm joined today by
Mr. Hoven. Today we're going to be moving beyond the Spanish-American War and looking at the imperialistic policy of the United States after this entanglement and what they were doing to spread their influence throughout the world.
And we're doing this by focusing on the presidents during this era. And those presidents are Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson.
Those presidents, they sound familiar. We talked about them before sometime?
We sure have, Mr. Hoven, the Progressive Era, right?
Oh, that's right.
The Progressive Era, we focus on their domestic policy. What's that mean, domestic policy?
Domestic, isn't that something like with regards to what went on within the country's borders?
That's just it. And now we're going to focus on the foreign policies of those same presidents, meaning what they were doing outside of our borders. See, these presidents intervened abroad in other countries to pursue American goals and act in our national interests. They pursued goals that were often political, economic, military, and
motivated. They were motivated, weren't they? Yeah,
and
they were motivated.
There were
by
culture motivations too in there. Going chronologically, we're going to start out with Theodore Roosevelt by looking at what is taking place in the country of Panama. See, various nations had wanted to build a canal through Panama because Panama is what is known as a isthmus, which is a thin, narrow strip of land connecting two larger bodies of land. And the nice feature about Panama is that on either side of that thin strip of land is ocean. One side is the Atlantic, the other side is the Pacific.
Now, just to be clear, was Panama at this time its own sovereign nation?
Actually, it wasn't. You know who was running Panama at the time?
Was that, what, it got to be like the Colombians or something?
You got Colombia.
Oh,
smart guy,
gotcha.
Smart guy here.
Yeah, so it was the Colombians. So there needed to be a little bit of an extra push in order to get this canal started. And like Mr. Valancourt said, many countries wanted this canal for various reasons. Some of them were for specifically trade, while others were for military actions. And the U.S. was really interested in having this isthmus because then they wouldn't have to travel all the way down below the tip of South America.
That's right. And a great story to kind of go along with that. During the Spanish-American War, the USS Oregon had to travel 14,000 miles around the tip of South America just to get to Cuba. Yet, with this canal, if it was in existence at the time, it would have taken less than 5,000 to get to Cuba from California.
Wow, that's quite a difference.
Big difference.
Big difference, really.
So, how did the U.S. try to get to have this canal in Panama while the Colombians were in charge?
Well, of course, President Roosevelt was very interested in building the canal. He knew that a canal would promote U.S. commerce and military capability. So, Colombia was not exactly receptive to this idea, and they kind of pushed back against us. So in response, the U.S. sent down the USS Nashville to the port of Colón in Panama, which was trying to use a little bit of that imperialistic muscle to kind of help the Panamanians start a revolt and throw off the Colombian influence.
Like John Lennon, we're going to start a revolution. So you said the U.S. inspired a revolt in Panama against Colombia. Were they successful?
Yes, they were. With the presence of the USS Nashville, that inspired the people of Panama to rise up and overthrow the Colombian rulers.
Not really a fair fight, the U.S. against the Colombians.
No, not at all. And after this happened, the U.S. immediately recognizes Panama as its own individual sovereign country and immediately signs a treaty with them,
granting the U.S. rights to build the canal. This canal would be 51 miles long and it would take 40,000 workers to complete it, and over 10 years to do so. It would gain the nickname the Big Ditch, sort of like the Erie Canal gained the nickname Clinton's Ditch when it was being built after the governor of New York, Clinton.
Now, just a quick question. I know there were some issues with building the Erie Canal here, what with mosquitoes and disease. Was there anything like that down in Panama?
Oh, even worse, because it's a much more tropical environment. Mosquitoes were said to be so thick that you get a mouthful every time you take a breath. And the United States would control Panama until it officially gave it back to the Panamanians. I think that's correct, Panamanians, in 1999. So if Panama and the canal and the ousting of Colombia from Panama is an example of Theodore Roosevelt's foreign policy, is there a name that goes along with this foreign policy?
Yes, there is. The name of this policy is called the Big Stick Policy, and Roosevelt was famous for this quote that he said once. It was, "Speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far."
Isn't that a South African proverb?
It actually is, and what it essentially means is that words should be supported by strong action.
This is all because he wants to make the U.S. a great power that could exert that power around the world. So let's take a look at a couple examples of the Big Stick Policy in action. The first involves Roosevelt's Corollary, or extension of the Monroe Doctrine.
The Roosevelt Corollary was put in place basically because Latin American countries owed money to European countries, and a lot of people thought, including the presidents, that America should use its police power to preserve peace in Latin America.
That's right. He extends the Monroe Doctrine to kind of make us the police of Latin America, which allows the U.S. to intervene there and in the Caribbean. It sent troops down to...
No, in Nicaragua, there was an instance where troops were sent.
Yeah, trying to kind of stop some unrest, and they would prop up rulers who supported U.S. interests. That's still something that the U.S. is kind of famous for doing. If you remember just this past summer, well, it wasn't the summer, it was actually the springtime.
Right.
The U.S. had spent a lot of money kind of propping up Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, and even though he wasn't too kind to the people there.
Correct, and once this corollary is put into place, for the next 20 years, presidents would use this corollary to intervene in any affairs of Latin American countries. So another example of the Big Stick Policy in action was the creation and the worldly trip of the Great White Fleet.
Ooh, worldly trip. In fact, they circumnavigated the globe. You know what that means, Mr. Hoven? Circumnavigate?
You mean like kind of travel around the entire globe?
You got it.
The world?
Thinking back to explorers way back in 7th grade there. From 1904 to 1907, Roosevelt's going to send this Great White Fleet, this new state-of-the-art battleships around the world. And he's going to do this to kind of demonstrate the growing military power of the United States, especially where the Navy is concerned, and also to enforce treaties and protect overseas interests. His whole goal, really, besides those two things, the bigger picture, is that he wanted to work out the kinks in times of peace rather than times of war. They would visit many harbors of many different countries just as goodwill measures. And once they'd visit these harbors, they'd be given all sorts of gifts. One example is when they went to the harbor of Sydney, they were given a kangaroo as a gift from Australia.
Oh, Australia.
Yeah.
Sydney, Australia. Yep. So Roosevelt's policy, or his foreign policy, is really the one that we focus a lot on just because there's so many examples of it throughout our material and out through the course content. And with the other two presidents, and that's Taft and Wilson, there are some imperialistic policies, but really the main focus is Roosevelt. But taking, for example, William Howard Taft, his big foreign policy was known as dollar diplomacy. Essentially what that did was his idea of substituting dollars for bullets, and by getting American bankers or businessmen to invest abroad, that would help protect American interests.
So basically you're telling me he used money to gain power.
Exactly. And that was his whole plan.
All right. Well, Woodrow Wilson's a little bit different. Woodrow Wilson, his foreign policy isn't known as a dollar diplomacy, but it's known as moral diplomacy. Wilson believes that the United States should protect human rights, our national integrity, and to support opportunity for Americans abroad. But at the same time, he believed in self-determination, which is the belief that other countries should decide what happens in their country, including what type of government they should have. But yet, ironically, you would think there would probably be Roosevelt or Taft who intervened in more countries, but it was actually Wilson who intervened in more countries than the other two presidents of this era, including Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So that's going to end our talk today about imperialism in the presidency. We'd like to thank you guys for joining us. Next time, we're going to turn our focus to the Great War, or World War I.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.